Hi guys, my name is Girish Belli, your host for today for Back to Basics. It's kind of weird that we are having a different angle, and Back to Basics is doing a little experimenting on different episodes and getting improvements by every listener and every viewings that I get. I get good comments, I get bad comments, but just like what I said in every episode, every comment is very important to me, and I make my episodes as exciting as I can for my new guest and my previous guest also. So today we have a guest. We have a 7-time CIO. What does CIO mean? Well, it's a Chief Information Officer. Okay, we'll get into the basics of that. So he's a 7-time CIO and a 2-time author. And I'm very excited to talk to them because you know what? I'm a technologist also. So I like to pick his brain and get into the basics of his technology, or I should say our technology. His name is Mark Suttle. Mark, thank you for coming on my show, and I am so grateful that you're here.
It's a pleasure. I really appreciate the invitation.
Oh, absolutely. So Mark, first thing is first, before we get into any basics of technology, what does back to basic mean to you?
Well, in an IT context, it's funny how it seems that every generation of IT leadership has to relearn the lessons of their predecessors. The things that go wrong typically within the technology that's used to support a modern corporation, many times it has to do with human failure, the breakdown of processes, etc. And, sometimes it's inconceivable to me that we're still committing some of those same mistakes. People have to learn through experience, and partly because, you don't really go to school to get a degree in how to be a chief information officer. There is quite a bit of experiential learning that's involved after you've mastered maybe some fundamental technical skills. So to me, that's back to basics. Is try not to commit the sins of your forefathers over and over again.
So Mark, with that comment of yours, I think I've read some few pieces of the book, and the book actually mentions that I don't think there's a manual to learn a CIO. I think from the step-by-step process that I've read briefly, it seems like you have done some learning in each and every CIO positions that you have gone to in different companies, obviously, but I think you have learned step-by-step process. For example, why I say that, I mean, your first CIO, I think you were trying to improve yourself on the first CIO, that if you can be a CIO. Second, I think you proved to your direct reportees about that process.
That's true.
And then the third one, I think you gained the knowledge and tried to give a proper advice to people. Okay, and then the fourth, I think, is the function of an actual chief quality control. Can you explain all these processes? I think maybe I won too ahead of the game, but you tell me, Mark.
Well, so the book's been read by a variety of people, and many people outside of IT have kind of commented on, not to make it sound overly fancy, but the universality of this observation that, in any field, as you personally mature and age, your technical skills become older and increasingly obsolete, less effective. There's a whole new generation of technologies that come along. And people that opt for managerial responsibilities, tend to take on broader and broader groups and bigger programs and whatever. And so the focus of your attention and activity moves from being an individual contributor or managing a small technical team to taking on much more general management responsibilities. And when you function in those kind of broader management roles, you've come to realize very rapidly that nobody, including you, you're not smart enough, you don't have enough minutes in the day, you can't be like in this hub and spoke model where all decisions come back through you. Mm-hmm. And so as you kind of evolve and mature, you realize that it's important to surround yourself with really smart people. Yeah. And secondly, you have to learn how to coach and get out of their way and let them do the job they were meant to do when they were brought in. And so I think that's the pretty typical evolution. And it would occur in the technical ranks too. People that are still mentoring small technical teams, need to bring new talent on board and get them to adopt the specific procedures and day-to-day work practices that team follows.
So Mark, there was this one line that I read, and it was quite fascinating. So my apologies, I'm going to wear my glasses if you don't mind.
Sure.
So it actually says, people change jobs for the funniest reasons as a rule. I rarely interview candidates for staff jobs within my IT organization because I don't have the technical aptitude to evaluate their credentials. Now, you as a CIO, why are you going to say that? Because you are an IT guy, right? You should be looking at credential. You should evaluate the technical aspect of positions, but I guess that's not your job then.
Right. Well, so again, you've got an organization you're leading with dozens or several hundred people.
Yeah.
A specialist may be brought in with machine learning skills or Python programming skills, et cetera, and for somebody in my position to try to determine whether they're a credible and effective Python programmer would be ludicrous and a waste of the interview candidate's time and probably my time. So that's the intent of that message. Now I have been asked to get involved in some hiring decisions, and it's all around cultural fit or ability to work on a team, or do they have the business acumen? Do they have enough insight into our business processes to be effective? And frankly, and I hope many of your younger viewers should take this to heart. It's obviously important to go to school and get the right training and develop your skills from a technical perspective if you want to pursue a career in IT. But a lot of the reason you get hired is an assessment of your ability to work effectively with other people, empathize, communicate, provide, how should I say this, interact with your business counterparts in a language and a frequency and way that actually means something to them. They don't want to get a lecture in how to write Python code. They could really care less about that kind of thing. They're trying to solve a business problem, and so can you have an intelligent conversation about that business problem that they're trying to solve? So I have gotten involved in some hiring at a more technical level in the organization to try to ascertain those kind of qualities or characteristics.
So Mark, or the viewers, this is the book that you published, the last book. I think it was back in 2019, if I'm not mistaken.
This is the first book. I think this is back from 2016.
Okay. So I read this. Amazing book, by the way. I just don't understand where did you come up with this, or is it just all experience all into one book?
So it's a bit of a distillation of many years of experience in the IT field. I'll tell you a funny story about the way the book got started. I had this manila folder, and I used to call it the "you can't make this stuff up" folder. And whenever I saw something happen that I thought was incredibly ironic, or unbelievable, I would jot a couple notes to myself and I would just stick it in this folder. And I was this Groundhog Day phenomenon that I referred to before of IT leaders having to rediscover things that have already been discovered many times over, had motivated me to kind of try to pass the torch to another group of people that could benefit from my personal experience. And so I hit a point where I sat down with this folder. It was in the month of December, and I fleshed out an outline of the book, and I actually composed the draft of the book within 4 weeks in the following January. I did the first draft in 4 weeks. So I think the book was inside me. It was waiting to come out. I just had to go find the 4 weeks to sit down and let it.
So that actually, so how did it trigger? I mean, was it always in your bucket list that you have to make a book?
That's a good question. The book is, you don't write these kind of books for any kind of monetary gain whatsoever. So when I first talked to a publisher, they said, the audience for this kind of a book is probably 5,000 people. If you have a 5,000 person run, you will have done well. And it turned out that's about the run that we had for the first book.
Yeah.
And so, directly answer your question, probably a good half or more of the motivation is almost like personal therapy, just to kind of, get it off your chest that, I've got some strong feelings about the way things should be done, and I would really like to communicate them to the widest possible audience. And if it's just a kind of a boomerang conversation that I get to listen to myself and, get this down on paper, then that will have some, therapeutic consequences of its own. And it did, and it really did. And the other thing that you find is, it's so gratifying to have a reader that reaches out and says, this book touched me in some way. I was surprised after the book had been out for a couple of years, there were different college professors that had actually started to use it in their classes. They'd write me and say, I've been using this for 2 terms now. So, instances like that are a big part of the reward that you get from writing something.
So Mark, isn't it fascinating that whatever, or anybody, I mean, even for myself when I'm doing a podcast, you touch someone and it makes you so therapeutic or satisfactory, or whatever word you want to use. It makes you feel that at least if you touch one person and make them satisfied, I think you did your job as a book a writer, or even a podcaster for myself.
Here's the other part of it. Even if they don't come back and say, I learned something, it's a form of therapy for them. I can't tell you the number of people that have read one or both of the books that have come back and just said, I thought I was the only one. Like, I thought, now I realize I'm not the only one anymore that can see like we're doing this the wrong way, or that there's a better way of doing this. And so even those kind of comments, it may not be new or revolutionary to many of the readers, may not even be very profound, but it gives them some, kind of emotional reinforcement that they're not crazy,
So I mean, this is the second book that it just came out, I think, The Truth from the Valley. That is another book that I took some examples out of there, Mark, so I apologize from that. So I think I'm already implementing that on my other shows, as a podcaster, so thank you for that. So how did the second one, or the last one, made you think? Go ahead.
I've been here, I've lived in the Bay Area for about 20 plus years, and I had many jobs during that period of time that were outside the Bay Area. So I had work apartments in places like Denver and Houston and New York, but I always kept a home here. And over the course of it, I had relations with many venture capital firms and many startup companies in Silicon Valley. And then I had the good fortune to actually work for a rapidly growing, highly successful startup for about 3 years, from 2016 to 2019. And, there's a kind of a discovery process that the way we do IT here in Silicon Valley is different than a lot of other places I've been. More established markets with larger Fortune 500 companies. As everybody knows here, you've got companies that maybe 20 people to 200 to 2,000. You don't have a lot of the established practices. A lot of these companies have been so-called born in the cloud. They never had a data center to operate. They use SaaS applications. There's no mainframe to worry about. There's no ERP system. It's all been stitched together with cloud-based applications. And so there are some fundamental differences in the way the world works here. And I think those differences are starting to emerge and appear, everywhere. And so the second book was really intended as kind of a strategic planning guide. And to the best of my ability, I tried to sketch out some of these broad secular trends that were happening in the IT industry. And my challenge would be to another IT leader is to try to determine, which of these secular trends they can exploit for the benefit of, their teams and their company and ultimately themselves. Because you can't be good at everything. And, and there's a certain set of competencies that will allow you and your team to have a huge business impact. But for example, everybody talks about security. There are certain companies and industries where that's a concern.
It is.
But it's not a, life-threatening concern to the long-term viability of the corporation. Whereas in other maybe B2C type industries, it actually could be. And I could enumerate other, secular trends, but it's just a case of looking at what your company needs, what your competitors are up to, what your own weaknesses are, and then kind of doubling down where those big opportunities are. And that was really the purpose of the second book.
So Mark, thank you for the book, and thank you for the publishing of it. So Mark, we're gonna divert a little. So about your whole career. Now, what I have read is that you wanted to be in NASA. You wanted to be an astronaut.
I did want to be an astronaut.
So I guess that didn't happen, did it?
It did not happen.
Okay. So how did you start with the CIO, or did you go by steps before you became a CIO?
So actually, I did have an opportunity to work for NASA. I worked for NASA for 5 years at NASA headquarters in Washington, and I was involved in some of what they called the Earth observation programs that were responsible for Earth satellites, like the Landsat series of satellites. And I was also involved in some of the early days of the space shuttle missions as well. So I did get to kind of vicariously live my dream. And to be truthful, I actually got to meet a number of the astronauts during my time at NASA, and actually before my time at NASA. And I rapidly realized that I didn't really want to go through. There were aspects to that job or that role or that whatever that were not right for me. So at the end of the day, that probably would have been the right thing to do. But I did get to, kind of, again, vicariously experience what life at NASA was like. So to get back to your question, I worked for an oil company for about 10 years after I left NASA. And oil companies are really just big technology companies that happen to drill holes in the earth and build pipelines. And they spend a lot of money on technology. And I tell people, I sort of got a master's degree in computer science when I worked for this oil company. We were buying new kind of workstations and image processing applications and data integration tools, et cetera, that were at the time pretty state of the art. And so that's what really gave me the technical background. And that led to ultimately a CIO role. So my first CIO role was with an oil company called Occidental Petroleum back in the 1990s. And I look back on it, they really offered me a vice president's job heading up the corporate applications team at their headquarters in Los Angeles. And I was kind of cocky enough to tell them that I didn't think I could do the job unless I got the CIO title. And I kind of talked them into the title. So Mark,
the 7-time CIO, what is the span years of that 7 years of that 7 positions?
Mid 90s to the late 2010s.
Okay, so were you getting bored that you kept on changing? I mean, I'm pretty sure you must have get this question over and over again. I think you get tired of it, but honestly, seriously, that's 7 times. So were you getting bored, or were you just getting, I guess, bored?
Well, no. I mean, yes, I have several friends in the profession who kind of view this as being a glutton for punishment, right? I mean, the CIO job, you don't get a lot of thank yous. People think you spend too much money.
Yeah.
And their expectations rise all the time. They expect everything to work flawlessly. And if you've done a good job, you just raise the bar higher and higher for yourself. Every day that something goes right, the day it goes wrong, they're ready to take you out in the back lot and give you a thrashing. So to be perfectly blunt, some of the moves that I made were not of my own choice. So there were cases where one company I worked for was taken over by a private equity firm. Another was acquired by another firm. And, so when those kind of things happen, you have some degree of flexibility. Sometimes they ask you to leave. Sometimes they run programs where you kind of raise your hand if you want to move on. And so some of those, exogenous events triggered some of the moves that took place going from one step to the other. And then some of the others, literally there'd be a call out of the blue from a recruiter that would say, we'd like to talk to you about another opportunity. I'll tell you a funny story. When I made one of those moves that was triggered by a call from a recruiter, I went into my current boss, and I had already accepted this other offer of employment. And he said, well, what did they offer you? So then I told him, what the pay was going to be, and they were going to give me some stock and whatever. So he said to me, he said, "I'm glad you took that job because I wouldn't want somebody working for me who was so stupid that they would pass something like that up." So, some of these moves have been there have been strong incentives. Let's put it that way to try something new and different.
So I guess you went down to basics and say, it's all about, I guess, the money or the passion, or both.
Well, a little bit of both, and I mean, some of these opportunities that come along. So a good example is I spent 3 years at Visa. Of course, Visa runs, like the largest global credit card operation in the world, and just the sheer scale of their systems and the precision and response times. I mean, it's kind of an engineering marvel the way the thing works. And so I wouldn't always characterize it, as a monetary decision. For example, when I went to work for this organization, small startup company in the Bay Area, which was the last place I worked, a lot of the compensation was based on the equity, how the company was going to perform when it became a public company, which could either go north or south. You really can't tell. But part of the attraction of that organization was it was so small that I got to really build my own team from scratch, and you could just see like we were having an impact on operations. If you're an IT team in a huge Fortune 500 company, sometimes it takes a long time to feel like you move the needle in terms of the performance of the company itself. But in a smaller, rapidly growing firm, you can say, hey, that one system we put in, we went back and re-engineered this business process. Almost like overnight, suddenly you've opened up the company to maybe a new set of customers, or a happier customer experience, et cetera, et cetera. So you can really see, in a very short period of time, the impact of many of the projects that you're completing. And you don't always get that in a larger company.
So Mark, I mean, I've seen it, but I don't know about you, but in the last 20 years, I've seen so many changes in the IT field, in the technology field.
Sure.
Because in my time, I mean, I was a network engineer, and then slowly the industry forced me to get into cloud. Okay, so do you think you were forced to learn new things, or do you think that you were with the trend?
Probably more forced to learn new things. I mean, for example, in one job, if we go back quite a ways, implementing an ERP system, a major enterprise resource planning system, a huge monolithic piece of software that's going to probably support 75% of the company's day-to-day operations. Those are big projects. If done poorly or improperly, they can have really bad effects, devastating effects inside a company. So that's kind of one type of challenge. There was another firm that I joined. We had an e-commerce platform. We were actually selling consumer goods on a website, which at the time was a fairly innovative thing to do. I think we had a turnover of about $2 billion a year, and building that site and learning how to make day-to-day changes in the site to improve the navigation, the user experience, etc. Those are a whole new set of experiences. And so I guess maybe the better answer to your question is it kind of falls in the middle. I think, with experience, you bring a certain set of knowledge and experiences to any industry that's valuable, because you've seen the world in different ways beforehand. But then you get to that industry and you find out, well, guess what? I mean, the challenges that an oil and gas company has in terms of being successful are very different than a Visa, which is, again, very different than an enterprise software company.
Yeah.
Right? And so you take what you learned in the past and don't become a slave to it, but use it to inform the way that you address, some of the problems that you encounter. And, I've always had a healthy sense of natural curiosity. And each company, it's interesting to watch internally how it works. And I know I'm getting off on a bit of a monologue here, but to go back to Visa, when I took the job, I thought to myself, well, how hard can this be, right? I mean, you swipe the card, you make the payment, and then at night the banks settle up. The merchant banks and the member banks exchange funds. Everybody gets up in the morning, buys more stuff. Like, how hard can this be? And I will tell you, I spent over my first year there was almost again like a graduate education in the payments industry, and how particularly as you got into different geographies with different kind of rules and regulations, how things worked in Europe,
Hmm.
Middle East, and Asia, and Australia was very different. It had many differences from the way the cards were actually used in the United States. And so, it was a real learning experience as well.
Yeah,
And I
but
really enjoyed the business learnings, as much or maybe more than some of the technology learnings.
yeah, but Mark, if you think about it, I mean, I worked in telecommunication for the longest time, but when I worked in a healthcare for a couple of years, thinking technology is just technology, just like what you said about
Right.
technology and visa could be the same thing, but it's actually not, because in healthcare we had to go through HIPAA laws, we have to go through criteria and quote, regulations and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Which is very different than telecommunication. So same
Right.
thing with yours. I guess Visa is very different than any other telecommunication companies that you work for,
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
even the oil industry, basically.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, financial services, oil and gas,
Yeah.
distribution. I worked for a company that was a global components distributor for people that made electronic equipment, very special electronic equipment. So, like, we were managing global supply chains. We would source semiconductors and capacitors, resistors, all kinds of electrical components, primarily out of the U.S., and ship them to China for manufacturing purposes. There, um, we would have some customers that were called NPI customers for new product introduction. So, for example, maybe there's a new set-top box for your TV or a new video gaming box that might get experimentally built in the U.S. in a couple of markets like St. Louis and Denver, and they would
Yeah.
do that over the summer. And if there was big traction for that kind of a game box, then the manufacturers would go into worldwide scaled production, and
Mm.
whatever the amount of components that we had been supplying to these kind of first round trial projects, they suddenly would ramp them up on maybe 50x. Suddenly
Mm.
they'd say, well, now I need like 50x of that, and I want it to go to Hungary, and I want it to go to Brazil, and I want it to go to Malaysia, and like we need it, Monday, because we're like going into Christmas shopping, full scale production.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So
So no, no,
yeah,
go ahead, Mark.
I mean, but again, the business process was fascinating. I had never kind of thought of, yeah, it's just a discovery of things that always look simple from the outside, but it is so interesting. Like, you get inside a company,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
like your example, like it's a lot more complicated than it looks from the outside.
So listeners and viewers, I just want to explain something here that, yeah, Mark and I, it seems like we speak kind of the same language because we're in the technology fields, but if you really understand, it's very complex in very different industries. I mean, he worked in the oil industry, he worked in the visa department, in industry also. I worked in the healthcare and telecommunication. We're four different companies, four different environments, four different strategies are very different, and I think you will get to know the basics that no matter where you are, it is very different. So Mark, on one of the topics in your book, it's kind of weird. The title of the book, inside the book itself, it says "On Death and Dying" by Elizabeth Ross. Explain the five stages of that program. It's quite
So,
fascinating, by the way.
so it's I use it to talk about management dealing with talent debt. So it's funny, in IT, people are always worried about technical debt, which means you bought a lot of hardware and software. That it's like buying a car, right? The minute you drive the car out of the lot, it's depreciated and it's not as valuable as it was when you bought it. The same thing happens with a lot of IT capabilities. Once they're purchased, there's new things that come along all the time that compete with them. So the same way that organizations and companies have technical debt, if you look at the IT staff, the people you've hired in IT were to manage this equipment, which is aging and becoming obsolete. So therefore, the corollary by definition is that their skills are becoming aging and out of date. And something needs to be done about that. but most people are too distracted to really focus on it. And so Kubler-Ross, she's famous. She's passed away herself, but she, I think, was a psychologist, and she studied sort of an anthropologist, and she studied these kind of different stages that people go through. Thank you. When they kind of deal with this, either personally or with a loved one or a close friend. And I just thought there was a real analogy between sort of denial and anger and acknowledgement, and then actually like coming to grips with it and like accepting it and doing something about it at the end of the day. And without belaboring the analogy, the way I talked about it in the book was, people try to ignore this talent debt problem, and they say, well, it's really not so bad, and this things go wrong, and they say, well, let's bring some consultants in, or maybe we should like outsource part of the activities. Maybe somebody can do it better than we can. And those are usually kind of stopgap measures that will give you a little bit of license. But ultimately, you've really got to look into the mirror and figure out: do we need some radical surgery in terms of bringing new skills in here? Mm-hmm. And it's really hard to completely just retrain or reskill an existing team at the rate of technology change that occurs today. I mean, I suspect you've seen this in your own career. You need those people coming in. Maybe they're younger, maybe they're from a different industry that's more sophisticated in some technical fashion. They come in and look around and go, wow, like, guys, there's a whole different way of doing this.
Yeah. But Mark, out of the 5 stages, it's kind of weird analogy that she came up with in this book. One was denial, the other was anger, the other was bargaining, the other was depression, and then the other one was exception. But it looks like you changed the last word into action. So explain that one to me.
Good catch. So yeah, I think you don't just accept the continuing futility, or the inevitable demise of your own organization, but you actually are moved to action to do some of the hard things. And the hard things might be to let some people go. Some people, and when I've had to do that involuntarily, many cases people go on to find other opportunities that are a much better match for their skills and even the needs of the organizations that they go to. So they're highly valued in the new role that they assume. And if they had just kind of stayed in the comfort zone that they had been in, in their prior job, their career potential and development opportunities would have been severely limited. So that's one example of steps that need to be done, and or again, like really hiring some people that are from like a whole different planet. So a good example would be, you could have an outfit that's running your data center, and there's been some talk over, let's say, the last couple of years, we're going to have to start moving some of our production workloads up into the cloud. So you kind of find a couple of initial experiments, and you do a little bit of toe dipping in the water. And guys that run data centers love to run data centers. That's what they want to do for the rest of their lives. So they'll kind of find reasons why you really, after the initial toe dipping phase, like, that's good enough. Like, we might just take a pause here and not drive this thing. And then what will happen in many cases, a new leader will come in, and CIO, could be CIO, could be the head of the infrastructure operations. And they've come from some place that's almost all cloud-based, or that's years ahead of what this kind of hypothetical company is doing. And they will accomplish revolutionary change in 6 months. I mean, all the inertia and entropy and excuses and whatever sort of won't be tolerated. And it is interesting, that's effective leadership. Sometimes the leaders get dysfunctionally co-opted into living with the deficiencies or shortcomings or limitations or preconceived notions of their own teams, even though viscerally they know what they should be doing. But, it's like a dysfunctional family. They've just been co-opted into accepting behaviors that would not be acceptable in other circumstances. So the new leader comes in and just says, this isn't acceptable. People have momentary concerns about job security, and suddenly things that you thought were impossible, kind of get done. In fact, I'll tell you a funny story along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
This was not one that I was directly involved in, but there was a company, an oil company called Amoco, based out of Chicago, that was bought by British Petroleum many years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And Amoco was in the middle of a project to collapse 5 data centers that they had in the U.S. down to one.
Mm-hmm.
And they had selected Chicago as the final one surviving data center. And the last two were Tulsa and Chicago. So the consolidation continued, and they got down to the final two. And the Tulsa Center was more technical, supporting more technical operations in the company. The Chicago Center was more kind of back office and business oriented. But the plan all along had been to get everything to Chicago. So they found a way to procrastinate and argue and come up with reasons why this really couldn't quite happen, or more planning needed to be done, or whatever. So British Petroleum comes along and buys Amoco and announces, hey, guess what, guys? Our data center's in Houston. So we're taking everything in Chicago and Tulsa and taking it to Houston. And all those people that wanted to keep their jobs, they all said, that is the best idea I've ever heard. I think we should definitely all move to Houston, and we'll get this thing up and running in Houston. So that's just a real world example of, if you're in a situation where there's some uncertainty, a new leader can do that. Or sometimes if there's a strong competitive pressure, if take Capital One. Capital One completed a program last year in which they completely discontinued all data center operations. They moved everything to the cloud. Now, they didn't do that in 1 year, but they're a huge company, and the fact that they were successful kind of calls into question maybe some other companies that, again, have found a lot of procrastinating reasons why, that system's not quite ready, or would the security bother us if we were to move that kind of a system into the cloud, et cetera, et cetera.
But Mark, I mean, it looks like almost everyone, including consumers, forget about business, is moving into cloud. So now the question that I have is, security is going to be so hot item from now on, because now you're going to have so much data. I'm not saying that you're going to have, let's say I'm a consumer and I'm putting pictures up there, not inappropriate pictures. I'm just talking pictures in general, because those are my private pictures. That's going to be on the cloud. So it's going to be a lot of security violations going on left, right, center. So do you think we should be more careful now and more, I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah, so
it's a tough question because it's. Go ahead.
Well, I think we all lead a large digital wake.
Yeah.
In our activities, it's between the use of credit cards, the cell phone towers that you connect to during the day as you move around, things you choose to download on the internet or watch on TV. You leave a large digital wake, and I think people are a bit naive.
Yeah.
They don't really appreciate how big that wake actually is. And I'll share another anecdotal story. I was in one company where the FBI was conducting an investigation. They believed that a malicious third party had actually hijacked part of our server farm and had installed software. They were basically bouncing through our data center to go someplace behind the Iron Curtain at the time to engage in some nefarious activities. So we weren't directly culpable. In fact, we were just kind of like ignorant stooges. They came in and said, we need to go in and look at this thing. They didn't tell me a lot about what was going on, but it was clear that there were, again, these kind of like digital threads that they were using. And the amount of data that they were able to pull together was mind-boggling. Now, it wasn't this particular case, but again, you go through a toll booth, things you buy, there's so much information that's out there that, I think you need to be very circumspect. But then, we say that, but people are very risk accepting. They use the same passwords over and over. They don't, on first week of the new year, go back and update passwords in their financial accounts, et cetera. So, there's a lot of things that people could do to protect themselves that they frankly just don't bother. So you can't help people help themselves necessarily. You can put the best safeguards in place. But people have to take some degree of personal responsibility. This idea that I can do whatever I want, and it's everybody else's responsibility, right, and not mine. So I'm
Yeah.
going to agree to every privacy statement. I'll give any piece of information that people want.
Yeah, so Mark, I mean, I interviewed Edward from Tag Cyber. I think you must have talked to him
Yeah.
before. So I was talking to him about passwords being on the cloud. People are using, let's say, I'll just give you an example of a company called ABC Password, right, .com, and they're
Sure.
secure or whatever it is, right? You put all your passwords there, and I asked Ed, is that going to be safe? He says nothing is safe. I think you should just have a notebook in your drawer and keep there, and that is safe versus the one on the cloud.
Yeah.
So do you think from that aspect, do you think we're still safe, or Edward is right?
So, there's been a lot of research done that shows that if you use longer, more complex passwords, they can become effectively unbreakable.
Mm-hmm.
But many companies don't want to inconvenience people. So I think if you really have a concern, again, this is shared responsibility. I think when you get up to about a 16 character password,
Mm-hmm.
it gets to be very hard to break. And then if you were to rotate that, but think to ourselves, how many people really want to manipulate a 13 or 18 character, 16 character password? How many want to, flip that on a regular basis? So yeah, I think it can be
Yeah,
relatively unbreakable. That can be breached and stolen instead of just broken. Yeah,
of course I can. Of course I can.
definitely.
Yeah,
Yep.
of course I can. So,
Yes.
but do you think, for example, Gmails and Hotmails and Yahoos, the one which are web based, do you think they should also implement 30-day, 40-day, 45-day repeat of your password not being repeated after 15 days, 15 times? Do you think they should implement that on the cloud itself? Or do you
You
think
know,
we're still not mature yet?
No, I think that should be an option to the user, right? And if the user values the convenience
Yeah.
of using one password for 30 years in every account that they have, over the security aspect of it, then that person can, suffer whatever consequences associated with that decision. And, if I'm hyper concerned, then, I should have at least the ability to live by a different set of rules.
Yeah. So Mark, it seems like I'm in a candy shop and asking all these questions about technology, and I feel so proud that you are on my show and you have accepted that. So thank you so much, Mark, for coming on my show. So before I let you go, and do you have any last words before you go?
I'm going to circle back to where we started, in terms of a conversation about back to basics. I think there's a lot of learnings that are out there. People don't have to rediscover things. People who are at the beginning stages of their career, I would strongly encourage to, seek out mentorship opportunities. And you'd be surprised at the degree to which folks like myself, and I'm sure you as well, Girish, are really willing to invest time in helping other people in developing their careers. That doesn't mean setting up a regularly scheduled meeting the third Monday of the month, for the next 3 years, but it can be a resource that you can draw on. You don't have to bring people questions, help me solve this problem. It can just be an opportunity for some degree of reflection and a sounding board to bounce ideas off of. So I think a lot of times younger people are very deferential and just assume, oh, he or she wouldn't want to be bothered. They wouldn't be receptive to that kind of a request. I don't even know how to, approach them necessarily. But I'd be shocked, maybe like 8 or 9 times out of 10. I think that kind of an overture would be very well received. Provided that's not an overused kind of thing. People have other demands on their time. They don't want to have like a weekly, hour-long, sounding board conversation, but something that's kind of done on a selective basis. And I think there's just tremendous opportunities there to kind of get back to the basics of how you develop a career, perform in the business world, and morph your skills over time, like we talked again about at the beginning. whatever that technical capability that you had that got you the first job probably isn't going to be a big factor when it comes time to get like your fifth job. People are going to be looking for a whole different set of knowledge, skills, and experience than they did in that first job. And so you need to be continually learning, developing new competencies, and a healthy sense of curiosity will pay big dividends long term.
Yeah, for sure. Mark, thank you so much for coming on my show. Again, as always, I am so honored that you were on my show there. Thank you again,
Great.
Mark, and I will definitely pick your brain on some emails, and love to pick your brain on other items and other topics that I have.
Great. Thanks so much for the invitations.
No, thank you so much. So, guys, this is we spoke with Mark today. We spoke with the technologist. We spoke with the CIO. I mean, just like what Mark said, hard work seriously pays off. If you put your hard work in there, it will definitely pay off. There's no easy way out. There's no anything like that. So just keep in mind, hard work always pays off. So I will give you a quote of the day, just like what I always do on my show. The quote of the day is the future is here, is just unevenly distributed. That is by Mark's book, and I stole that quote from him, and it's by William Gibbons in his book. So Mark, thank you again, and guys, thank you again as usual. As always, at the end of the episode, I always say everything in life goes back to basics, and that's what we did today, guys. Guys, I will see you next week. Keep on commenting, keep on subscribing, keep on supporting me, and give me all the love you can, as much as you can on my show. Guys, take care. See you next week. God bless. Next week's episode on Back to Basics. Complicated for a lot of people, and when they think of automation and AI, they think, oh, there are too many things happening there. But at the end of the day, I mean, we're just turning on the light, but I think there's too many things happening in between.
I mean, it's just like when you go in the kitchen and you want to make an omelet. I mean, there's a lot of things happening.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But you're so used to it, you're comfortable with it, and you go for it.
Yeah.
This is new for people.
Yeah.
Right? It's been there
Yeah,
inherently, but now they're waking up to it. It's new. So I don't think that the day is far. I mean, probably in one more generation, you'll find people won't say things like that, I hope.
And do you think this AI and automation is solving all our problems?